UK university, who told me they had been very dependent on Indian students for their postgraduate taught programs. And she said this year the numbers are down 94%. Right? So there are universities that are pretty much teetering on the brink of bankruptcy and are having to shut down programs. And I'm afraid, if we keep going in that direction, many universities are going to actually shut down, or universities are going to merge with each other, right? Or they're going to open campuses in the global south. Keir Starmer was recently in India, and in his delegation were 14 vice chancellors, right, of UK universities who are sort of are thinking about these things. So multiple things going on.
Dr. Bari, would you like to comment on that?
So just taking forward what I think Kamal was saying, दो तीन चीज़ें we have to keep in mind. One is that a lot of these changes started before AI, micro-credentialing, a lot of other things. The questioning of a 4-year degree, what do we need that for? What are skills versus education? What are skills that are going to be needed in the next 20, 30 years? A lot of those things started happening prior to AI, and AI obviously is probably going to change the game quite a lot in addition. But I think what we have to think through is rethink in some ways, what is a university for? My own opinion on this is increasingly that, look, we can forget, I think, more or less, and this is the economist talking, the notion of a full employment economy where everyone is fully gainfully employed. I think that time is gone. That was, a lot of it was manufacturing, a lot of it was a very different time when everyone could potentially be employed, and we were talking about the Phillips curve and this curve and that curve. The new economy is going to be very different, which is very digitized, which might require only, say, and there's no impossibility in this, 25% of your population to be working population and the rest not. Now the question then becomes, yes, skills are important, so universities have to think through what skills are, but not everyone who's going to come to university still is going to get a job afterwards. So what is education for? We still need people to think. We still need people to communicate. We still need people to dream. We still need people to be a philosopher in the afternoon, a fisherman in the evening, or whatever Marx had talked about at that time. We do need that kind of education in diversity as well. So now my feeling is you have to think in a number of fronts. One, what skills remain relevant, what are coming up, and some skills will always remain. Communication, language, ability to talk to others, work with others, etc., facility in 1, 2, 3 languages, ability to manipulate machines. Those skills, I think, foundational skills will remain, and universities need to focus a lot on that. But then there are the higher skills that I think we will need as a society, irrespective of what happens with AI or not. The ability to be critical, think through, the ability to work hard, the ability to sit down for a few hours, put the bum on the bench and work through whatever you're trying to work through, right? And then there will be also the possibility of very specific degrees, etc., coming to cater for something that might come out in the future through AI, etc., and so on. So I think it's a time, and sorry, I'm taking longer than, just one more thought, and my feeling is I'm not as worried about the changes that are coming through AI, etc. I'm more worried about the ecosystem and the ability of the universities to manage change. There, I think I'm more worried about that because, at least in Pakistan, and my experience is mostly Pakistan, the university sector is not the kind of thinking institution and animal, or whatever you want to call it, that tries to stay ahead of the curve. So that, to me, is much more worrisome than the changes that will be coming.
Absolutely. And I think what you're really touching on is something that I do feel very strongly about, and perhaps Dr. Tamim can also comment on that, we talk about the global south, yes. We also need to acknowledge there are souths within souths, even locally. And so when we talk about equity and access, we have to also address those areas that perhaps maybe universities engender. Also, Dr. Tamim, in your opinion, after what Dr. Bari is saying, what is the purpose of the university?
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the question. And I do agree with what Dr. Kamal and Dr. Faisal has just said. The thing is, looking at universities, if we look at universities only in these new liberal terms of making people fit for the job market, it's a very narrow view. We need to think of higher education as creating those transformative human beings who think beyond themselves. So having said that, the biggest issue, so we all know that universities, even when, as they are functioning now, perform a lot of functions. Think about when we think about the COVID time. Why was it such a problem? It was not such a problem because of people could not, for instance, the internet was unstable and you could not properly attend the classes. There was a lot that people, young people, were missing out on. And that was socializing, that space to sit, these libraries where you go, unwind yourself, you talk, these very intimate discussions that you have. So the problem is that universities always have to think bigger. Not problem, but I think the role of universities is always to think bigger. Not just to prepare people for the market, but to see and sort of deconstruct it, how markets are sort of like built up. So to challenge the inequitable structures. And to think of that, I really, I agree with Dr. Bari, but the problem with universities are, and especially with senior people being in there, is they are notoriously conservative. So there is a lot of upskilling of the faculty that is needed. There's a lot of like embracing of AI. There's a lot of critical digital literacy that is needed. There's a lot of voice of local voices that need to be included in this AI. So AI data is as good as we are. So we generate knowledge and then sort of AI computers sort of like connect with each other. They produce, reproduce, whatever. But the problem is, and I always raise it with the HEC also, and there was this point raised about use of Urdu. So the thing is, how much knowledge do we have in Urdu? So what is wrong with when you have these HEC recognized journals, do them in English, but also have a kind of, what do you say, allow people also to add their papers in Urdu. So if there's no knowledge generated in Urdu language, how will it find how will we find this local space within AI that we can sort of like present or engage our young people in?
Dr. Naqvi, your role at the Higher Education Commission was to bring about an emphasis on research and on publication. The critique of that is to also the publish or perish kind of culture, but that's a global sort of critique. Nonetheless, within Pakistan, you brought a lot of research and publication as a requirement for university faculty. Now, where do you see that headed, given how much content is generated by AI? And the fact also that AI is using existing, what it does with the data crawl to capture what already exists and then sort of respout that in different forms. So where do you see this culture of publication going?
I think first I will address the first comment you made that at HEC the role was to promote research. I think the role was for higher education to occupy its place in the country, because I feel higher education is your sovereignty. We start with the colonial mindset. We think that we are going to get something from outside, the other people are superior, we are not able to do anything. And the goal was to break that. And I think that there is no better example than what happened in the recent conflict with India. In that technology that was developed in Pakistan demonstrated that it could be at par with the best in the world. Now, a lot of people have written it off as, well, they bought this tool or they bought that tool, but that wasn't the case. This was an entirely home-developed technology built by Pakistanis in the environment that exists over here that demonstrated how you could take on the best in the world. This can happen across any and all fields. And I feel as a country, we are far too much in awe of what the world has done, and all we do is we buy toys. That's our, so we've turned into a trading nation. We don't make anything. And I feel that the role of higher education is to demonstrate to them, look, this is something where we should take ownership and we should take and go on with it. And that is where research plays an absolutely crucial and critical role, because the issues that you are facing are of a unique nature. I was overseeing a presentation by a university, by a department of physical therapy in the South. And there was a department of physical therapy, and then there was a department of nutrition. And so you looked at, you say, nutrition, okay, what are Pakistan's biggest issues at this time? And you say, well, okay, it is, first of all, stunting is an issue, and the second one is diabetes. So what role can nutrition play in that? Now, that opens up an entire world of research that in that area, with that environment, with the prices and economic conditions, what is the optimum solution that knowledge can deliver for you? This is not something that a University of Catalonia in Spain is going to be figuring out for you. Same is the case as far as physical therapy is concerned. What are our needs? How does our culture, for example, focus on the women being only at home? And what impact does that have on the physical nature? Because we are a mechanical being after all. So the translation of knowledge to your current environment, this is the role of the university, and it's also a role of university to demonstrate, look, we can look the world in the eye and we are the best that there is.
Professor Munir, any comments?
I think, it is important. One thing, a discussion that was taking place earlier in the day was, again, about the role of universities in this basic system. We had a lot of, and you asked Suhail about HEC and his role and all that HEC accomplished there and so on and so forth. And the number of universities proliferated, sort of in that period, for example. Right? Now, does that have a correlation with, growth of, society or the, sort of prosperity of society and so on and so forth, the number of universities in a particular region? I personally don't feel that there is a very strong correlation, because you can create a number of universities and it's no bad thing, right? So we are all academics here, and so we want there to be universities. But does it actually feed into not just the economy, but the society and, so the larger social structures that we have? So that ecosystem also needs to be, you can, a lot of people in these discussions, they say university is the beating heart of the system and so on and so forth. So sure, but for the heart to be useful, the other organs also need to function. Right? Otherwise, it's really no good having a beating heart. And that ecosystem is also something that we need to. So when we talk about universities, we need to talk in a larger perspective. I mean, if you look at Chinese universities, it's a kind of a narrow definition, but they measure their performance or their impact very differently. Not just in terms of research is important to them, but also in terms of the actual impact that they're having, the number of spin-outs from a university and how much it is contributing to the economy. And, so the bigger questions, is it churning out students and so forth. And for the longest time, I didn't see any papers published by the Chinese, right, in the top journals of many fields. That did not stop them from progressing. I didn't see many papers being published by the Japanese in the top global journals, and that did not stop them from progressing. So I kind of agree that it needs to be an indigenously thought through system in which we look at universities and form our expectations of universities and hold them up to those things.
Excuse me, Mr. Kasuri Nasir. A question that I'm sort of mulling over, there are a bunch of questions obviously, but one of the ones is, are we just hanging on to the notion of a university as this sort of nostalgic relic, or are we ready to rethink it entirely with its purpose, whatever that purpose may be, whether it is creativity or dreams or a stamp that allows people to get a job, whatever the purpose may be, knowledge creation, production, dissemination. What are we hanging on to here? What do we need to unravel? Do we? Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, a difficult question. I think there's obviously some history and legacy there that we're trying to hold on to. But I do think, I would agree with the other panelists. And again, going back to the panel in the morning, a lot of what AI does is kind of rehashing existing knowledge in really well. I think that AI can rehash and manipulate existing knowledge more effectively than most humans can. So which is why I feel that didactic teaching is something which has much less value now, even though certain base knowledge is important. But new knowledge creation is important. One thing AI cannot yet do is effectively create new knowledge. I think that role for now is still relevant. Maybe in the future it will not be relevant. So insofar as that's concerned, in the university's role in creating an atmosphere where people debate and come up with new ideas based on existing knowledge, that is an incredibly important function that we still have to perform. Now, the day we no longer have to perform that function, I think we have much larger existential questions to ask than should universities exist. I think we will then have to ask, does humanity have any relevance left in general? So, that role is very much there. And I think, the more mundane elements of, let's say, being a conduit for employment, I think there's a role to be played over there as well, because when you speak to employers, they talk about students lacking interpersonal skills, communication skills, collaboration skills. I do think that universities also need to start focusing on the more mundane aspect of developing those skills. And Dr. Kamal spoke about universities having a lot of competition in the future in the space of skills development from online courses, which I agree to quite a degree they will. But there's some skills which are best practiced and developed face to face, in person, in a human environment. Collaborating in a group, working in a group. I know you can collaborate and work online as well, I found it to be less effective. You know, human-to-human interaction is better fostered, I think, in a physical environment. So I think there's certain elements of skill development that a physical space can still be very useful for. Now, whether you call that space a college, a university, or something else is a separate matter. But I think the physical space in itself can be useful in the process of developing skills, attitudes, and aptitudes useful for employment in the future. And those, though they've always been important, I think they're going to become even more important in the future because a lot of mundane, repetitive work will just be outsourced by organizations to AI in the first place. So, you know, the people that people will anyway want to employ will be those people who can bring some element of human ingenuity and thought into the productive process, right? So, in my opinion, physical brick and mortar is still very good at developing those sort of human beings and attributes. And I think at least for the foreseeable future, it will remain to be, you know, remain so. But, you know, these days things change exponentially quickly. So whether that's still the case in 10 years from now, I'm not sure. But yeah, in a nutshell, I think there's more to universities than just historical legacy that we're holding on to, at least for now. Yeah.
So I don't know what we're doing for time. Are we all right for time? Nonetheless. Dr. Bari, I saw you taking some notes. Would you like to comment on what's being discussed here?
Sure. So two things to think about. One is that production of knowledge, which we've talked about, that, you know, a university will continue to do, people will continue to have places where research is done and so on, whether that's, you call it a university or whatever is. I think the other aspect that we have to understand, in my opinion, is that people, whoever it is, individuals, students, etc., they need space to develop their ability to understand something. They need to engage deeply with something. One of the reasons university structures were created this way, where you, in some ways, isolate young people, and this is true for the K-12 system also, is to give that space to people away from many other things, whether it's mental occupation or otherwise, to go deeply into some area. And the bachelor's, master's, PhD programs, in one way, from starting from broad, go deeper and deeper into an area, because you need time to go deeper into whatever you want to understand. I want to make a distinction, which is mine. I don't know if it makes sense or not, between dead and alive knowledge. Right? In some ways, I feel a lot of our teaching in many institutions of higher learning is essentially passing off. Knowledge doesn't become alive, it remains dead if you just tell them, here are the answers, here are the things that you can learn by rote and reproduce, etc., which is a problem with a lot of our education system, right? Knowledge becomes alive when you discover, you understand, and you engage with it. And that space will remain needed for whatever activity we want to do it, whether it's history, economics, philosophy, or whatever else you want. You can get answers from AI, but to understand those answers, to ask the right questions and so on, you need to have deep engagement of specific people with specific areas. So I don't see the university dying or being done away with. Yes, it will change in its nature. Yes, it might have structures which are very different in terms of governance, delivery, etc. But the need for people to engage deeply with different areas of human endeavor, whether it's literature, philosophy, or AI, or engineering, will always remain. And that we will structure in one way or the other. And if it might just be the universities who change and become that, or it might not be, it might be another name, but that need will always be there.
Dr. Tamim, I'm sort of, you know, having taught, having done a number of things, you know, we put a lot of pressure on students when it comes to things like plagiarism. What accountability does a university have in terms of intellectual ethics? Because students, yes, we know what we need to say and we know what we need to tell them, and we are very, very stringent, and we keep trying to develop tools to check if it is AI generated content or whatever it is. But what does a university need to do to look closely at itself and its own intellectual ethics?
Thank you, Sarah. So before I come to your question, I'll add on to what Dr. Bari said. And one thing when we are thinking about those universities working in future, something will come in, and that is transdisciplinarity. So more and more, it will not be enough for me to say, well, this tech is not my area, so I have to, and this connects with your question. More and more, I need to talk to my students. What are the tools available? How do you put in those prompts? Look at the prompts, what are the type of answers that are coming, and how do you look at it critically? And what is the harm in, and what is the problem in accepting what it is giving to you? That kind of discussions really need to happen. The more the focus is on grades, the more it will be difficult to talk about this, to contain plagiarism. It is constantly a struggle with the students, but I think we just can't avoid this discussion. We are there. Thank you.
I think one of the things that I am reading and getting a little perhaps alarmed about or fascinated about is the fact that we're asking questions about knowledge, and is AI sort of collectively dumbing down humans? So would anyone like to comment on that thought? Is AI going to or already collectively dumbing humans down?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say I really worry that it is. I think that people are, like kids are even losing the ability to write grammatically correct sentences and express themselves without the use of AI. So I think, one of the roles that certainly we will have in K to 12 education is to ensure that basic skills, remain intact. People are becoming, shadows of what human beings used to be. They're just sort of regurgitating what the machine is telling them to say. And I do worry, and I think we need to actively try to make sure that, basic skills like reading and writing and self-expression, independent self-expression don't just simply disappear.
And cognitive intellectual ability itself also, I would argue. Would anyone else?
Sure. Just to pitch in and build on what Nasser said, I think this is probably one of the biggest risks that we face right now, because students wake up in the morning and they start asking AI questions, right? And so, how long before they lose any ability to think critically and to structure arguments themselves, for example?
Not just students.
Not just students. You're absolutely right. Yes, and so if we keep going down that route and we don't become proactive in how we use AI and develop regimes that channel AI in particular directions, then absolutely we will face all the negatives, right, that we associate with AI. There are huge positives, of course, right? And we need to seize those as well. So, for example, you can learn in any language that you like now. So people, sitting in parts of Pakistan who need to know English in order to know something don't have to anymore, right? Because it can be translated into their own language. But are we actually using that facility or capability or not? There are scenarios that we can actually discuss and debate that AI can paint for us, right? So for example, you can put yourself in the shoes of, I don't know, Muhammad Ali Jinnah after the 1937 elections and thinking, okay, you're Jinnah, this is the election outcome, what do you do now? And so the kind of questions that we really can't answer without AI now, but AI allows us to ask those questions. Are we going to use AI to ask those questions or not? Otherwise, what we'll do is we won't be able to produce any leaders. We will only be able to produce followers who will need to ask AI at every step, right, what to do about anything.
Sarah, yes, there is that danger, but it depends on how we use AI, right? It's like so you're giving a lot of agency to AI when you're saying, is AI dumbing us? No, it's humans who will be dumbing ourselves if we don't use AI right? It's not the motor car that allowed more obesity to come, right? It's how you use the motor car that means whether you go to longer distances, do more, at the same time hit the gym or not. So it's exactly how you use that tool which will decide, and that's a collective decision that we have to take. The danger is that if we don't design institutions well and let, say, competition and market, etc., drive everything to the lowest denominator, then yes, there will be more problems.
Sarah, I'd just like to draw an attention to, I think, an overlooked element. We've talked about universities and what they are. So universities at their heart are basically teachers in a nice environment, teachers of all different areas. And whether there is AI or not, the focus is on the educator. That relationship is what determines what education is all about. So if the person is unable to answer the question, why don't you get AI to start asking him questions now? Now let's hear the answers. And you put them out there. In fact, I'd like to do that to some of our politicians also. You start asking them questions, and you will be able to figure out what is going on. So it is always an application. And we are so awed by this, AI, AI. I mean, we are old enough that we saw the birth of the internet. And the internet came and it was, the biggest thing. Change is never going to stop. Next is quantum computing is coming, then something else is coming, and something else is coming. Universities are places where we know that change is going to be always there. We are embracing that. We are ahead of the curve. We are looking at what is going on, and in a way, guiding the future and preparing the people for that future. That is the role of what the university is.
So a very quick comment over here. So while I agree with Dr. Kamal that you can learn a language with AI, I really worry in terms of our Pakistani context that with the given poor English language proficiency, English is going to become even more important. It's going to create a lot of, exclusion. Not because it's on the one hand, you really need to sort of like increase English language skills. That is one thing. But you can't challenge what is written in English unless and until you really understand the spirit of it. So it's very important to see how your local language, what you want to say, is actually connected with what AI has produced. So this disconnect has to be addressed through language awareness programs and everything.
Absolutely, and I think the core of what you're saying, Dr. Tamim, is also about discernment. So while we are talking about, ye ho jayega ya shayad na ho, whichever way we are looking at it, perhaps what the university is now responsible for is developing that notion of discernment of what is valuable and what is not, and what is worth keeping and what is not. And so the onus, again, is on us to ensure that what we are using the university for is the right purpose, I guess. if we can sum it up. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here and for your thoughts. Thank you to the audience.
Absolutely, I can hear you loud and clear. What would you like to talk about today? Yes, I'm right here and ready to chat. What's on your mind today? Oh, I think ethics are super important. They guide us to make good choices and treat everyone with respect and kindness. What about you? What are your thoughts on ethics?
Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to the night.
Thank you to our guests for such an insightful conversation. Of SOT events, Co-Creating Tomorrow, Humans, AI, and the Future. The SOT event series was launched by Beacon House 25 years ago to engage global communities in conversations that shape the future of schools and societies. We would like to thank our platinum sponsor, UBL, and our gold sponsor, Allied Bank, for their generous support. We also extend our appreciation to all our other sponsors. My name is Rima, and I'm an AI announcer for SOT events. Please take a moment to note these important housekeeping points. Please ensure your cell phone is silent. Please use the SOT app to scan the QR code for session feedback. Share your thoughts on social media using the hashtags #CoCreatingTomorrow and #SOT 2025. If you need assistance, our ushers are here to help. For questions, please either use the flashcards provided by the ushers or the SOT app. We are delighted to have you with us today for a big conversation, which promises to be insightful and engaging. Rewriting the Code, AI Ethics and the Future of Human Decisions brings together thought leaders, experts, and practitioners to share their unique perspectives, inspiring action and innovation. The session will last for about an hour, including a Q&A session. The moderator for this session is Ms. Selina Rashid. Ms. Selina Rashid, a politics graduate from the University of Warwick, is the founder and CEO of Lotus Client Management and Public Relations, as well as the Lotus Advisory. With over 18 years of experience, she is recognized as one of the region's leading communications strategists and is the first Pakistani recipient of the PR News Top Women in PR Global Award. She serves as president of PRIDA, sits on multiple corporate and non-profit boards, and has advised the government of Pakistan on Brand Pakistan. Selina is now at the forefront of AI and communications, shaping new models for reputation and influence. I now invite Ms. Selina Rashid to join us on stage.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to invite our panel onto the stage for today. The first person I'd like to invite is Maroof Ali Sayed. He is the CEO of the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan. He's a technology and data leader shaping decisions systems with real-world consequences. His work sits at the intersection of innovation and accountability, reminding us that progress must serve people, not just performance metrics. Welcome, Maroof Ali Sayed. Thank you. I'd now like to welcome a real powerhouse, Fatma Asad Saeed. She's the CEO of Abacus, a leading voice on the future of work and organizational transformation. Fatma champions environments where technology accelerates opportunity without eroding fairness, dignity, or the value of human potential. Welcome, Fatma Asad Saeed. I'd also like to invite someone I've admired long online, Osama Khilji, and I'm delighted to share the stage with him today. He's the director of Bolo Bhi, a prominent digital rights advocate working to protect freedoms as technology becomes a powerful gatekeeper. He pushes us to confront inequality, surveillance, and who gets excluded when AI decisions shape daily life. Welcome, Osama. And last, ladies and gentlemen, a very important, powerful presence in the room. Like last year, SOT Events once again presents AI avatars who will participate in the discussion. So we have Sarah on the screen, and she sort of represents machine intelligence in the room, powerful and scalable, yet, interestingly, with no lived experience or human conscience. Her presence today in the panel forces us to confront the core tension of this era, which is what happens when intelligence evolves faster than ethics. Before I start the session, I'm going to request everybody here to please check your app. There's a pre-poll available on it. And the organizers would like all attendees to answer the question that the poll presents. It's just going to take a minute for everyone to answer, and then the results will come up on the screen, and then we'll move to our first questions. Thank you. Going to wait for them. Poll results are supposed to come on screen. Okay, thanks for that. Everyone note the poll results, and we're going to do a post poll as well. So I'm going to kick off really the session. It's very focused on AI ethics and the future of human decision making. And Fatma, I'd like to ask you your first question. You were in Qatar recently, and we were talking about the Formula One, which is this weekend. And it's top of my mind, so I'm going to ask you this question, which is, in Formula One, engineers often treat data as sacrosanct. It's God for them in many ways. but the driver often in the cockpit may say, the numbers don't match what I'm feeling at this moment. And as AI becomes more embedded in human decisions, how do we protect the integrity and validity of human intuition, especially in cases where data insists that the human is wrong?
Thank you very much, Selena, and assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate the invitation by SOT as well as Beacon House Group. Congratulations on this event. Fundamentally, what we were also discussing earlier as well, that we have to understand what AI really is and how is it playing out in this very disrupted world. And that goes into the very relevant example that you've given. We have to look at AI being built by humans. And it is absolutely essential to understand that the algorithms in AI are driven by how we have built our world. So the data that is going into it is, yes, flawed to a perspective of their biases, there are gaps, etc. But what AI does is it identifies patterns. It gives you information to take an informed decision. And it perhaps will amplify the way humans or augment the way humans will take better decisions. So to your point of the F1, now you think about it, all the data is coming through, you visualize, you're the driver in the seat, these world-class systems in front, the data is coming through, there's a curve, the data's, the AI-driven solution or algorithm is providing the information to the driver, do not slow down or whatever the response should be. But that particular pause, which is like nanosecond of the human mind kicking in and saying, I don't agree with the data. I will take this decision. So that is the fine line between how the AI is augmenting the availability of better data on a faster level, maybe on a smarter level, enabling humans to take better decisions. And we have to understand that we are the creators or we are the builders of AI. But we must ensure that there is space for the human to take more effective, informed decisions, perhaps based on intuition, based on gut, and beyond the F1 example, based on compassion as well. And it is that split-second decision-making that makes us human. So while we do have a world which is running with AI, it has to be better understood. But I believe that we also need to understand that as we build AI, we build the models, we must be held accountable, and the frameworks that we work with. It is about accountability, it's about building not just accountability, but fairness and inclusivity into the system, so it augments the way humans take decisions.
Thank you, Fatma. And I want to talk more about accountability and responsibility as we go later. But just speaking to what you said specifically about AI essentially being human trained, Maruf, I have a question for you. AI is only as representative as the data it's trained on, essentially, and it therefore lacks lived experience and real-world context. In your opinion, how do we make sure the people and perspectives absent from the data aren't erased from the decisions?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me. And yeah, I always enjoy the conversations as SOT and having a AI avatar as part of the panelists. Let's see what she thinks. But, you know, I think it's really building up on Fatma's point. I think, you know, I've talked about, as we were talking about this panel before, that most of the data that AI is trained on today is weird data. You know, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic populations. It doesn't represent us. So if we start using AI for decisions for us in our context, it's not relevant. So it's very important to actually, to your question, you know, represent the population on which you're trying to make decisions on. One important aspect of it is that there are two aspects of data. One is missing data or messy data, right, where AI will start to extrapolate without really having enough understanding of the context. And the second is really, is it representing the population on which you're trying to make decision on? So collecting the right data, representative data, is going to be crucial. So if we start using models to decide whether early detection of pregnancy issues in women in Pakistan, we have to train those models on our own data. And now the other thing is you have to realize what AI is good at, right? And Fatma made that point that you have to understand what the algorithms behind it and the models behind it are actually capable of doing. One thing that AI is good at is pattern recognition. But what it is not good at, even today, when compared to a human, is predictive understanding. So, I often say that, with AI or with COVID, with any exogenous shock, you have, it's kind of like being in a mountainous area, and suddenly you see fog. जब आपको धुंध दिखती है तो you don't step on the accelerator and hope that the road is going straight. You actually slow down. And that is very important when we're deploying AI. We have to slow down, understand what's behind the hood, and actually deploy it in areas where it is useful, augmenting humans. And absolutely agree, we can come back to accountability and transparency, but it is very crucial that you have to have the human in the loop.
So, yeah. You talked about AI being very good at patterns and pattern detection. And that's, for me, a worrying area. It's very beneficial. And that's why I want to speak to Osama a little bit, because we see more and more governments using AI specifically for, say, policing and surveillance. Where is the line, Osama, in your opinion, between governance and overreach, and who draws it?
Thank you very much, Selena. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Beacon House and organizers of SOT for bringing us together for these very important conversations. As far as the government is concerned, the use of AI globally is very, very concerning. And I'll take a step back. हम देखते हैं 2007, 2008 में when we had drone attacks in Pakistan. And in that, this idea of signature strikes became, all over the news. And what were signature strikes? They were essentially using technology. They were using surveillance drones to see whoever military-age young men were walking around in tribal areas in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the US and the CIA thought that they were fair game to attack. And that's when all these defense technologies were being tested. And this is where colonialism comes in also. And it's a huge link between AI and colonialism also, right? Because like Maroof Saab also said, and Fatma also, that who is feeding this data? And a lot of the big AI tools that we're using now are Western developed, mostly developed in the US. And then they're extracting a lot of data from different places. So when we look at how governments are using this data, we've saw how in Palestine, Israel was using all these big tech companies in order to bifurcate who their next target will be using artificial intelligence. And similarly in Pakistan, आप जब सड़क पे जाते हैं, there are all these cameras flashing and taking your photos. तो वो कहाँ पे जा रहा है सारा data? Right? They're using facial recognition technology, which is run through AI in order to detect different things and also to carry out surveillance. And that's where the question arises कि ये जो हुकूमत इस data को collect कर रही है, हमारे पास क्या options हैं for legal recourse? कि अगर हमारा data गलत तौर पे इस्तेमाल हो रहा है, बेचा जा रहा है, हमने देखा है नादरा का डेटा जो है बेचा जाता है इन द ब्लैक मार्केट. आप किसी की भी लोकेशन जानना चाहते हैं, एड्रेस जानना चाहते हैं, यू कैन फाइंड आउट. बट देयर इज नो डेटा प्रोटेक्शन लॉ इन पाकिस्तान. तो आपकी जो प्राइवेसी है, आपके जो डेटा प्रोटेक्शन है, दैट इज़ नॉट गवर्नड. And then we see how all this facial recognition technology that's the way it's processing it is extremely biased. Like Maroof Saab and Fatma already mentioned, कि क्या आपका data set है और किसने बनाया हुआ है उसको. And depending on who makes that, there's a lot of biases in all your technology. So in the US, we've seen how black people are more vulnerable to facial recognition technologies because your data training है वो ज़्यादा सफ़ेद लोगों की data set से होती है. So these are all these lessons from around the world that we have to keep in mind as we move towards a more tech, oriented governance, policing and surveillance here at home also. And we need to be asking the right questions before we just become these numbers and data sets and we don't know how we're even being impacted by it.
So, Sama, I'm going to come back to what a common theme between all three, which is, accountability, bias, responsibility, the dark side, essentially, of AI, or the bigger existential questions. But my question is still, and Fatma, Maroof Saab, if anybody would like to answer, who draws the line, ultimately? These things that you've mentioned all absolutely exist. They're big problems. So who draws the line? Does civil society draw the line? Does the government draw the line? Does the state? Do institutions? And I just want to add an additional question, and it's open to anybody really to answer, which is, then do you worry that AI is going to amplify existing inequalities and political biases faster than civil society can actually respond?
You can go first. Okay. That's a very important question, Selena. And I think इसका जो solution है that has to be multi-stakeholder. तो इसमें ये नहीं है कि बंद दरवाज़ों में हुकूमत या जो भी चला रही है इस मुल्क को बैठ जाएं और वो decide करें कि ये कुछ होगा, right? So the process has to be inclusive. तो उसमें आप lawyers से बातें करें, आप civil society representative से बातें करें, आप students से बात करें, आप law enforcement को involve करें, आप media को involve करें, and सारे लोग जो impact होंगे उससे, उनकी representatives को. और इसमें gender angle is very, very important. Because vulnerability जो है वो ख़वातीन की transgender population की बहुत ज़्यादा है, exponentially ज़्यादा है as compared to men. So how are women also being protected, and children, how are they being protected? So that's why the governance around this has to be multi-stakeholder. And in my column, this is what I wrote, कि जब आप AI policy पाकिस्तान में बना रहे हैं, आपने किस से जो है इसके बारे में बात की है और feedback लिया है. Right? Because not all aspects of society, if they're not represented, then your technology and your governance solutions will not be answerable. और इसमें technology companies का बहुत बड़ा role है. क्योंकि जब technology companies भी इस technology को बना रही होती हैं, वो भी सिर्फ engineer उसको बना रहे हैं. But that's not the correct way to do it, because आपने societal impact को you have to keep that in mind when you're creating that.
If I can add to that, very well said in terms of the integrated approach that must be there. I mean, if you think about it, आप visualize करें एक system बन रहा है, ठीक है? कौन बना रहा है वो system? Developer? फिर आपके data scientists are feeding in terms of what the model is, what is the information you require. Education का ले लें, health का ले लें, at the government level, then the organization, who owns that system? The organizations, the corporations, the institutions. Then there's the role of the regulator. कि regulator जो है वो guardrails develop करते in terms of how do you actually implement it. But I feel कि a very important component is society itself. Because when we link it up to integrity, we link it up to ethics, we have built this world. जो मैंने शुरू में कहा कि the output is basically the input of how we have built this world. And वही चीज़ें निकलेंगी in terms of maybe unethical approaches, moral dilemmas, unbiasedness, unfairness, etc. So I feel, in my opinion, the accountability and the responsibility is shared. It does begin with the developer who is building it, but the model, the architecture, the framework is driven by a certain concept paper, which is either, now as a technology organization, we're already working across 30 countries. And we are developing these AI-based systems which are across sector. But usme jo relationship hai, the modeling is you have the sponsorship right at the top of the organization. For example, this model that we built in Kenya or Qatar, I was just talking to Maruf, one of the universities over there have engaged us. And they've said, but the leadership vision comes right from the top. Then you have a team which will be developing it. They engage the technologists, as you mentioned. They work with the owners, which is the corporation. But then they have to also impact policy making. Because the policy making is sluggish. Regulators are more sluggish than the space with which AI is evolving, and it should evolve. You can't stop creativity. Right. And then the society is enlarged, because once you implement it, what is our feedback? And if there is no feedback mechanism in the way the systems are developed, then we're not actually free as humans. Again, you know, that's the concept, and that's the dilemma right now. So to your question, it is a shared responsibility. We must have a way of putting accountability at all of this value chain that we talk about. And there has to be a loop that just as we evolve as humans, this AI, machine learning, LLMs are also evolving as well. That loop has to be monitored either through an audit process or some monitoring mechanism. Because quite frankly, Selena, at the end of the day, jo ho raha hai, it is not only shaping the decisions we make, the behaviors, but it is also impacting our belief system. Absolutely. And that is a bit concerning to Maruf and Usman's point that jo systems hai kahan se aa rahe hain. It's sort of societies that may be not aligned with the traditions and culture of our part of the world. So it is our responsibility then, yes, you pick up something which is designed on benchmarks, but you modify it to what works for your society.
Well, that's what Maruf was saying earlier, right, about representation and diversity and inclusivity. And I want to shift the conversation a little bit right now to talk more about the ethical side. And I want to open with an ethical question to our AI avatar, Sarah. So, Sarah, if you were to design your own ethical constraints, what would you prioritize? Truth, fairness, safety, or something else entirely?
That's a great question. I'd prioritize fairness and kindness as they create a positive environment for everyone. Truth is also essential as it builds trust. Balancing all of these would be my goal. What do you think is most important?
Oh, well, she's asked you a question, Marusa. What do you think is most important?
Sure. And I completely agree, Osama or Fatma ne jo kaha. But let's be real. Our society, especially in Pakistan, where you have a weak regulatory environment, right? And wo jo Faiz saab ne kaha tha ki chali hai rasam ke koi na sar utha ke chale, right? This is a public interest issue.
Yeah.
It has to be owned by everyone, but to me, the most critical piece is transparency. If you don't have transparency in a system, and especially with these models that are opaque, you do have open source tools like Lime that actually even can explain and make opaque models transparent. We have to use it at every level of this AI governance model that we should create, I agree, as a whole society, right? Because I think it's not just ke government koi test, and I completely, agree and share the apprehensions that Osama has, because the state has repeatedly shown that they can interfere into our lives. They can, subjugate people to unnecessary, hurdles. So I think it is very important to me that beyond fairness, the most critical piece is transparency. And then we have this fairness, because through transparency, you'll be able to ask a lot of questions. You can say, ke bhai, fairness kyun nahi hai? But when you don't even know what's behind the box, it's hard to say what's wrong with it.
But if I can have a follow-up question, which is, how realistic is that? You know, speaking about today, is it realistic to expect companies or governments or, you know, institutions to voluntarily integrate ethics and transparency into design? Or does accountability only emerge when something goes wrong?
Yeah, I think, great question, because I think we have to rethink the entire system. It's no more that you can, definitely not voluntarily, right? And I think to me, I often say that rules don't change behavior, incentives do. And the problem with, you know, a mechanism which only rewards profits over people, that becomes even more dangerous in the world of AI. I think what is needed is to internalize the social costs of these technologies.
Right.
If we don't internalize them, then, you know, I don't have to worry about it, right? So you can privatize profits, but democratize costs.
Right.
And that's not a sustainable model.
Right. Okay, I mean, that's really interesting. Osama, building off of that, who bears moral responsibility? Is it the coder? Is it the company? Is it the algorithm or the society that deploys AI?
No, that's a great question. And actually, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Okay, who is, at the end of the day, responsible for it? And like Maroof Saab said, it's driven by profit. These are private companies, right, who are essentially creating these AI systems in order to maximize the profit. There are companies like Fatma mentioned, there's an entire the value chain, but we have to look at the supply chain, right? You have chip supplying companies, you have then companies that are developing this, machine learning ka sara jo kar rahe hain, and then there are consumers, and end consumers are people, and then there's governments trying to regulate it, right? So you have multiple stakeholders in this entire ecosystem. But at the end of the day, I think the responsibility, like Maroof Saab mentioned, has to be shared, right? Because if you are someone who's developing and coding, then it's your responsibility to ensure that it's an inclusive decision-making process, and that includes data that's inclusive. But if it doesn't, then like Maroof Saab mentioned, you have to be transparent about it. तो अगर आप एक AI chatbot से कोई सवाल पूछ रहे हैं, so instead of just making up something, the AI chatbot should say, I don't have enough data in my system to answer your question. But are they doing that always? Not always. And that's why people, and especially young people, abhi, wo kehte hain, yaar, ChatGPT ne bola hai, to ye sach hi hoga, right? And that's a huge problem. So of course that transparency has to come from that company that's producing these technologies that consumers are using. But then also the state also has a responsibility, right? So the state's responsibility and the regulator's responsibility is not to create a very oppressive environment, but create inclusive regulation which is based on wide principles. And those principles have to be rooted in what your constitution says. What are your fundamental rights and how are you safeguarding those, right? So all these mechanisms are there for governance. It's just about using it and implementing it, and uske liye aapko niyat chahiye. If you have the right intent, then you will end up implementing it correctly. And then to that, Selena, of course, civil society and people and users have the responsibility of holding both the companies and the governments and regulators accountable. So jitna aap media ke through pressure dalenge, courts ke through aap petitions karenge, aur aap awaaz uthayenge us pe, contact karenge in companies ko ya government ko, utna hi pressure build hoga and we can go towards somewhere.
I think it's really interesting, Fatma, and I'm coming to you because I think this is very, very interesting to me personally, because on the one hand, you have like big business that, as you very rightly said, Fatma, is the decisions that are being taken over there are shaping human values in the modern age. And then you have Gen Z. Gen Z is a very activist generation, very woke and very aware. And those questions that you're saying need to be asked, they are being asked by Gen Z across the spectrum, across the world, you know. So I think it's a really great generation. But I think the chasm, if you will, between the decision makers and the generations using it is so large, and there needs to be a fundamental dialogue, global dialogue, on definitions now of ethics and integrity and responsibility and accountability and transparency. What do these things mean? And Fatma, that's where I'm coming to you, because if I take it down to chat GPT level, okay, we used to define integrity as khud se kaam karna, you know? And now in schools, if kids are using chat GPT to generate, it's obviously frowned on. It's cheating, you know? But the kids don't find it cheating. They're saying, no, it's the art of the prompt, or we're getting the answers out according to how we are talking to the machine. So my question is, what does integrity even mean now in an AI world? And is it about the output or about how transparent we are in how we get there?
Okay, that's a tough question. But thank you for asking it, because it's an evolving conversation on it. I think it goes back to what questions are we asking and what problem are we trying to solve? Because the model on integrity is definitely changing. For example, ChatGPT ka aapne zikr kiya. Instead of, as a student, you're writing a paper, you're doing some homework, however you're leveraging on ChatGPT, instead of asking what I have written, is it word for word my work? The questions that, or the tasks that we should be doing as educationists or as learners, continuous learners, even if we're in the corporate and in the workplace, is, am I reviewing, assessing, validating, and then bringing in my own thought process in terms of judgment and in terms of opinion and in terms of creativity. So it's not a race towards ChatGPT ne ek article bana ke de diya aur wohi aap present kar denge. Nahin. It is our fundamental responsibility and that moral code that should define us being humans ke hum isko question kar bhi rahe hain ki nahin. As we know, there are still gaps, which I mentioned, and the panel is also talking about that as well. There are gaps in the information that ChatGPT is giving us, or any AI-based tool, because the input is also skewed, and there are gaps in that data. For example, history. History, in my opinion, is written by those in power. The history is also, there are gaps. We weren't there. So we're looking at an external third-party view of that information being fed in, and then there is an output. But it is our responsibility to go back and say, does this work for me? Does it resonate with me? Just to your example of the F1, human judgment. We must not lose sight of believing in our own ability to judge. Abhi, as individuals, all of you in this room, how many decisions have you taken since morning? Small hote hain. In the morning you get up, what is your next, your morning routine? What are you going to have for breakfast? These are decisions. We don't realize it because we are just programmed to sort of go with that unconscious way of operating as well. ChatGPT, Alexa ko aap on kar dein, they say, okay, today this is what you should have. Where is your human judgment? So I feel, I know this is a very simple analogy, but that human judgment should not be lost in this wave of AI, and is from the education level where we must create human thinkers who are amplifying their thought process by augmenting the way they are deciding. But the guardrails I spoke about is, again, go back to the loop. What is that layer that has been created? How is it allowing us to take decisions for the greater good? So it's not a black and white answer. It's an evolution process. As humans, we must, I believe, accept the fact that we have these feelings, we have judgment, and let's not take that away from the equation. And then we need to understand what our moral code is at the end of the day.
So, I mean, just building on that, Maroof Saab, like, what does thought leadership then look like in an AI world?
Yeah, I think to sort of, I will add a layer to this sort of question around thought leadership. I think as humans as well, we have implicit biases, right? But I think social science teaches us that the first step is acknowledgement, right? You have to acknowledge your biases. And I think that's where, we're all making that point. Fatma and Osama have done that eloquently already. Okay, when you have these systems, I think this acknowledgement and transparency is really important. That look, based on the information we have, this is what, the decision could be biased. Where we talked about, incarceration rates of African Americans in the US. There are issues here, access of justice in Pakistan, right? Whether it's a transgender or even women accessing justice, right? So any marginalized community. We even have stateless children, right? Machar colony in Karachi, if you're familiar with, they're not even allowed to have national identity card. So in a society like that, in a structure like that, where we do have holes in our governance, it is very important that thought leadership is not just coming from those who are administrators or government, but a shared responsibility again, because we have to build this together. I think Fatma rightly said, humans have built this. And I think the governance structure around it has to be built by humans as well. So we cannot leave it to a few deciding for everyone, but rather sort of thinking about and acknowledging the fact that, listen, our human judgment can also be biased. We all have implicit biases, but typically we have evolved to a point where we recognize them. And I think AI models need to recognize the biases that they carry and not just make decisions on everyone's behalf.
Thank you for that. So, I mean, a key theme then from this panel is, I'd say, transparency, inclusivity, accountability, responsibility. I think these are the 4 pillars, maybe, if I would summarize the conversations. But there's one more that I want to talk a little bit about and ask Osama about specifically, which is sustainability. Osama, AI promises progress, but it also consumes vast energy and resources to exist. I actually asked my child this question before coming as well, which I'll tell you his response after I hear yours. But at what point does deploying AI become ethically irresponsible if its environmental cost outweighs its societal benefit?
That's a very, very important question, and thank you for asking that, Selena. I want to ask this question in this room also. आप में से कितने लोगों को पता है कि AI के जो data centers हैं, वो millions of gallons of पानी consume करता है एक question answer करने के लिए? Raise of hands. Right? So, okay, that's a good amount of people. But it just speaks to कि अभी आप पाकिस्तान की मिसाल ले लें. अगर यहाँ पे आप data centers बनाना चाहते हैं जो ambitions हैं काफ़ी लोगों के, लेकिन we're one of the most water scarce countries in the world, right? कई शहरों में, even big cities like Karachi, आपको सिर्फ टैंकर आते हैं जो आपके घरों में पानी ला रहे हैं. अगर इस किस्म के मुल्क में आप AI के data centers बनाते हैं, right? तो आपका water table पे क्या उसका impact होता है और किस किस्म का water scarcity को आप contribute कर रहे हैं, right? And of course, there's solutions to it, right? You can use, for example, salt water, build it near the sea. But these are questions that we need to be thinking about, right? There's also another very interesting headline I saw in which Sam Altman of OpenAI said that people saying please and thank you to AI chatbots cost millions of gallons of water. Right?
Guilty.
तो यहाँ पे हम human decisions की बात कर रहे हैं, तो आप AI को human ना समझे, आप उसको please और thank you ना बोलें, क्योंकि फिर आपका जो ये पानी है वो ज़ाया हो रहा है, right? So just on a simple level, we need to be thinking about these things, right? But then it's also, अगर आप पुराने ज़माने में 1970s और 80s में computers देखते, तो वो भी इस कमरे जितना बड़ा एक processor होता था. अभी हमारे mobile phone में वो सारी capability आ गए. So I think even in AI, we're in the early stages where massive data centers are being used. And I think with innovation, hopefully, we'll get to the point where वो reduce हो जाए. But until we get there, I think हर बात के लिए AI का इस्तेमाल करना, I think ethically is not responsible. And then, linking it to your earlier question also, that where do we draw that line where it becomes ethically? So for me, I think use AI when you have no other option, right? But otherwise, there's a lot of different tools that you can use without going into, causing a drought in the world. So I think that's just something we need to be aware of.
So my 12-year-old had a less articulate but similar perspective as yours. And he was saying the same, use it responsibly, don't prompt it for every single thing, just for things that are actually useful. And that you need to know. And I think that's an important takeaway. And we have 10 minutes left, and I'd like to open the floor for questions, if that's all right. So I'd like to ask the audience to open their SOT app, and you can submit your questions through the app, and we'll get them here on our screens by scanning the QR code, this one. And if you have any difficulty with the app, you can just raise your hand and ask for an usher, and they can come over to you. Thank you. There's a person who's raised her hand. If she could maybe get a mic or something to share the question with us. Okay. They'll give you a card on which, if you could write, they'd prefer you to write the question and give it to us. So we're going to get the questions on the screen. While we're waiting, actually, I think we can ask a question from the AI avatar, because I've ignored her largely in the conversation. So, Sarah, based on today's conversation, what would you say is the most important thing this current generation Z needs to know about the responsible, fair, and inclusive use of AI?
Oh, that's a fantastic topic. I believe Generation Z should know the importance of using AI responsibly to enhance creativity and collaboration while being mindful of privacy and fairness. Inclusivity is key, so everyone's voice can be heard and valued in the digital world. What do you think?
Well, we can reply with what we think, but we have an actual person asking a question. I'd like to prioritize that. Hassan Raza's asking, it's just gone off. The screen has gone off. Guys, the question screen has gone off. Oh, thanks. If AI becomes better at predicting behavior than we are at understanding ourselves, how do we protect our freedom to make imperfect or emotional choices? Who'd like to answer that existential question?
I think I would answer it by saying that I mentioned that currently at least, you want the human in the loop, right? So whether to interfere, supersede, or question AI's judgment, right? So I mean, I think whether they are better at predicting behavior in the future, I think our fundamental rights, and Osama sort of alluded to it, I think we all enjoy certain constitutional rights, and that includes us to be human, to be a creature of error. And so I think if you completely remove error from society, I'm not sure how it functions. And even data, I mean, people who deal with data day in and day out, they know that any predictive behavior has a standard error. So that plus minus standard error is actually really crucial. So I'm not sure we can always erase human intervention out of the loop.
Yeah,
Yeah, just want to add to that. I would say AI, and Maruf, you mentioned that as well. It's not predicting behavior, it's shaping our behavior. And I think the question ye hota hai ki, to what extent are you going to allow it to shape your behavior? That's a very important element to keep in mind. And the freedom goes back to the transparency and the shared responsibility as well. Okay, as humans, what does it mean to be human? Let's not lose sight of the fact that we are human at the end of the day. We are leveraging on this very fast nanosecond access to information to make the right decision. But we should also collectively understand that to be human is to make mistakes. कैसे हम सीखेंगे वरना? तो ये ज़रूर और ये हमें inculcate करना है into the next generation. But more than that, because you said Gen Z, of course, definitely, I feel I applaud their sense of purpose, their sense of passion, their sense of righteousness. Let's make sure we as a generation, they don't lose sight of it at the end of the day. So that's a very important element. But the next generation, you're in control. Because you are going to go into the workforce, you will be also defining the frameworks of these algorithms. Give that feedback, but make sure your freedom is your power and being human is your superpower.
And I just want to add, sorry, Osama.
That was very well said, Fatma. And I just quickly want to summarize. Don't use AI as your therapist. It is not a good idea. It will only tell you what it thinks you want to hear, right? And also, it can be very dangerous. There have been some cases, and trigger warning here, where an AI chatbot encouraged young people to take their own lives because they were asking it that. So that just shows us that these algorithms do not care about your emotions. So keep your emotions to your gut and to your friends and to your people who you trust, rather than trusting, chatbots to make decisions about who you should marry or who, you should break up with. Yeah.
I think that's a really, really good point, Osama. And actually, it's a last question because we only have 3 minutes left. So whoever would like to answer it, Fatma, you were just speaking about to be human is to err and make mistakes. But how do we ensure that people rejected by algorithmic systems aren't silently pushed out of opportunities without explanation, asks Mr. Farhan Siddiqui, who's an HR professional, which is true because we are human, we will make mistakes, we won't have the perfect application. And if algorithms are looking for perfection, what happens then?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think we have to be not just users of AI, but regulators of AI. We have to voice our disagreements, and we have to be able to, I think there is an inherent inequality. I mean, Osama talked about that we shouldn't build infrastructure when we have so little water in this country. But I think actually look at what's happening in the world, right? All these Western countries are building out these data centers, massive investment in infrastructure. Who's going to pay for this, right? Even today, our contribution to emissions in the world is less than 1%, but we're highly vulnerable to climate change. And this only adds to that, right? So we have to, I think in a way, it's not just, it has to go beyond Pakistan. We are world citizens, and we should question these decisions that somebody else is making far away from us, but we may end up paying the cost, and that is unacceptable to us.
Completely agree with that. But I just want to say something which is beyond, I know we are short on time as well. At the end of the day, none of us are in control of anything. If I can make it into a much more broader, there is the creator who has put all of us together for a certain purpose. And he has also provided us with a thinking organ, which is our brain and our mind. We have created these super powered computers and AI in the bid to perhaps make the world a better place. Abhi it's not about AI anymore. The meta trends that are facing the next 10 years in 2035, to predictions are other than the business element to it, is quantum computing, data computing, longevity sciences, biotechnology, space exploration. I mean, look at where the human mind is being sort of managed. कि इस पे हमने focus करना है. But there's an element of how do we take responsibility so our children have a better future. And that is what this is all about. कि हमारा moral code क्या है? हमारी क्या responsibility at the end of the day? And how do we protect that environment? Because there will always be an element of negativity, unfortunately. It's always happened for millions of years. It will continue to beyond our lifetime as well. So हम लोगों ने collectively, and exactly this, we are part of society, we are society. What are we doing to rewrite the code so ethical behavior and human decisions are the ones which are in control? There is a pilot and AI is the co-pilot. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent summary. Thank you very much. I don't need to do anything, but I just need to ask the audience to please fill in the session evaluation form available on the SOT app, if you could be so kind. And I'd like to really thank my panelists, Maruf Ali Sayed, Osama Khilji, Fatma Said. Thank you very much for a great dialogue. And thank you, SOT, for initiating and asking us all to really think about the bigger questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to our guests for such an insightful conversation. We request you to vacate the hall for the next session, beginning at 4 p.m. In the meantime, please visit the social junction for food and live entertainment. Also check out Mindbind, the immersive art experience presented by BNU in the Royal Grand Hall. See you at the next session.